We're going to get started momentarily. We're just letting a few more folks into the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Tim Fink, Policy Director for American Farmland Trust. Since last year, AFT's policy team has been working on our 2023 Farm Bill Advocacy platform. Our recommendations are the result of hosting over 16 workshops with over 300 farmers, ranchers, local NGO leaders, and other experts across the country. Thank you again to everyone who participated in that process. Our recommendations are also the result of AFT's over 40 years of experience advancing federal policy, as well as the numerous conversations we've had with other leading organizations. Before we launch, I want to make a small tech note. Everyone has been muted, so no need to worry about any background noise. If you would like to ask a question, you can do so by going to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. The orange arrow at the top of that panel allows the panel to open and close. You'll see a question section on the control panel. Feel free to type in questions there throughout today's event. If you have any tech trouble, please note any issues in the chat section of the control panel, and we will do our best to help you. Also, we are recording this webinar, and we'll send the video link shortly after the event. Please feel free to share this recording widely. As part of today's event, we have an outstanding slate of speakers. We have two farmers and a state program director who will share both the challenges they face at the ground level, as well as the ways that the Farm Bill supports their daily work. AFT's policy team will then lay out in brief our 2023 Farm Bill Advocacy platform, highlighting some key recommendations. Following these presentations, there will be a 30-minute Q&A with all of the speakers that will start at roughly 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. But first, AFT's President and CEO, John Piotti, will say a little bit about our organization, our vision for the future of agriculture, and some of the challenges we must address to realize this vision. John?
Thanks, Tim, and thanks all of you for joining today. We really appreciate it. For those of you who aren't familiar with American Farmland Trust, we have for over 40 years played an outsized role advancing conservation agriculture through advocacy, research, and pioneering on-the-ground programming. We take a holistic approach to agriculture. Our work focuses on the land itself, the practices employed on that land, and the farmers and ranchers who steward that land. The issues we care about don't fit into individual silos. Rather, they reinforce one another. Adopting better conservation practices not only helps the environment, but also helps a farmer's bottom line. Improving farm profitability helps keep farmland from being sold for development. Protecting farmland with an agricultural conservation easement can help make land more affordable for a new farmer. And a diverse new generation of farmers is eager to try out new conservation practices. In short, it's a system. AFT is a forward-looking organization, and here's the future we envision. The nation's agricultural land base, especially our best land, is recognized as an essential national asset. In sprawling development, consuming farmland is a thing of the past. Farmers and ranchers operating thriving businesses that support vibrant rural communities. Our food system is resilient to volatility and shocks while producing abundant, healthy, and affordable food for all. Farmers and ranchers are recognized as stewards of our working land and are given the tools and resources they need to improve our water, air, soil, and climate. And finally, that agriculture reflects the diversity of our nation, having removed structural barriers for farmers of color and having recruited a new generation into the field. This future is possible, but there are challenges that we must first overcome. Farmland loss threatens the future of farming. From 2001 to 2016, 11 million acres of agricultural land were paved over, fragmented, or converted to other uses. AFT's latest research indicates that we are on track to lose another 18.4 million acres by the year 2040. And once this finite resource is developed, it never returns to agriculture. Record high farmland prices are pushing the dream of farm ownership further away from young, beginning, and historically marginalized producers. Aspiring farmers are increasingly forced into unwinnable competition with developers, investors, and other more established farmers. At the same time, we are in the midst of a historic generational transfer of agricultural land and assets, with 40% of farmland likely to change hands by 2035. And many senior farmers, they don't have someone ready to take over the operation when they retire. Many farmers and ranchers operate on razor-thin margins and remain vulnerable to disruptions, while lacking the resources to seize new and emerging market opportunities. In the pandemic, we saw the fragility of this system and the importance of business skills, as many farmers, especially smaller ones, lost their institutional markets overnight and had to pivot operations. At the same time, we saw farmers struggling to provide the basic financial records needed to access the relief funding that was available. And finally, farmers are on the front lines of the climate crisis, experiencing everything from higher temperatures to increased flooding and drought to wildfires to unpredictable seasons. All this is affecting their profitability and their very sense of security. It's important to remember that these challenges are not theoretical. They're impacting real people right now. Your friends, your family, your neighbors, and community members, your constituents. And this is why we've brought in speakers today who will share their experiences with you. Fortunately, we have before us in the upcoming Farm Bill an opportunity to make changes to accelerate and expand the good policies and programs that are moving agriculture in the right direction. Yet time is of the essence. The challenges we face cannot wait another 5 years for the next Farm Bill. We must meet the moment now. The 2023 Farm Bill is arguably the most important in a generation. AFT has been actively involved in every Farm Bill since our founding in 1980, including our pivotal leadership advancing major conservation programs. People often think of agricultural policy changing slowly over time, with incremental changes in successive Farm Bills. But this hasn't always been the case. The early Farm Bills advanced agriculture by leaps and bounds, and the conservation title enacted in 1985 was a true game changer. It's important to remember that at one point, all of the beneficial programs we count on today were new, untested, and maybe even a little bold for some. From the very first Farm Bills enacted in the wreckage of the Great Depression and the devastation of the Dust Bowl, Farm Bills have been a powerful tool for tackling some of the worst crises our nation has faced and presenting a brighter future for the future, a brighter vision for the future. It's time to think big again, and time for the Farm Bill to live up to its history. Thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrew Barenberg, AFT's Deputy Policy Director. As John said, we have an outstanding panel of speakers with us to help illustrate the opportunities and challenges before us. Our first speaker is Cheryl Hagan Zachariason. She is a partner of the Zachariason Partnership, a 600-acre diversified grain and livestock farm situated just north of Pullman, Washington. Among the crops they produce, rotations of wheat, triticale, barley, oats, and peas, with most of that grain direct marketed as feed to local farms and others in their community. They also work with a young rancher to graze their cover crops. Cheryl will share with us the story of her farm's transition to agroecology and their adoption of conservation practices. Cheryl, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, our farm has existed since 1935, and we pretty much were considered a conventional farm up until about 2019. And by conventional, I mean that we used a lot of tillage. We also rely very heavily on synthetic inputs, fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, all of the sides. So in 2019, we decided to transition primarily because we had one of the best yields we've ever had in our winter wheat crop, and yet it was the least profitable, mainly because of all the inputs we had to apply to achieve those yields. So what we decided to do was really take a look at what farming system was out there that we could adopt and make our economics more resilient. The other thing that we also experienced because of tillage was serious soil erosion. And we knew that we could not continue farming in this way and remain viable and be resilient. We did change our system. We started transitioning in 2013. We went to a direct seeding, no-till system. We reduced and have been trying to eliminate our inputs, and we also started trying to incorporate diversity into our cropping system. So we do an intercropping. For example, we'll grow triticale and peas together, harvest them, and then market them through our feed stocks. What we also have experienced in our transition, and it has been very difficult, is the weather extremes. So in 2019 and 2020, our yields were pretty good, even though we expected to take a hit in the transition to a more biological or agroecological system. In 2021, we suffered a historic heat and drought. We have never in this country or in this county had the lack of rain that went for so long. And we've never had that sort of heat early in the season. So essentially, we only were able to harvest 10% of our crops. We were fortunate because we had been reducing our inputs, so we could weather that extreme weather event. The problem is that we also had an extreme weather event this year in 2022 during our spring growing season, where we had 7.5 inches of rain from mid-April to June, which is a third of our annual rainfall. It made planting very difficult. It made it very unpredictable. And because some of our crops were planted late, we will now suffer yields because we're going into a record-breaking heat streak in the next couple of days. But we are committed to a transition because we believe that in a more biologically sound system, that we will have more resilient soils, that we will be able to manage and withstand extreme weather events, which I'm afraid are going to be the new normal for us. Some of the challenges that we've had in the transition have been primarily with some of the safety nets that are currently in place. For example, crop insurance. We use an access in 2019 when we wanted to get crop insurance for our winter wheat. Because we were intercropping, we were told that we could not participate. And in subsequent years, when I've talked to our insurance agent, because we're raising crops that aren't normal for this area, they're very hesitant to work with us and to allow us to get crop insurance. We've really had problems getting access. We are lucky in that NRCS with USDA has some programs that help in transitions. We primarily have participated in the Conservation Stewardship Program. It's been really great working with our NRCS agents. We are really lucky and blessed to have some exceptional people who we work with. We applied for a CSP contract, and because of our agent and all the work that he put into it, we were accepted, which is very important for us for our transition. What we have found, though, too, is that there's very little to no technical information to guide us through a transition. So we've had to learn through our own mistakes. ARS, or the Agricultural Research Service in Pullman, is starting to go in that direction of understanding different cropping systems, and hopefully we'll get that technical information soon. We have been really lucky. As I said, we've had some exceptional help with NRCS agents helping us get the CSP program. We've also been really fortunate because there are other younger farmers in the area who recognize that we do need to change how we farm. We cannot keep going the way we are going and expect to even exist. The vagaries of weather, extreme weather events, and extreme economic events and conditions are really putting everyone on the edge. And so we have formed a group called the Biofarming Group, where young farmers primarily get together and we share our experiences and try to share the technical information that we have access to or have learned through our own experimentations. We are also beginning to see improvement in our soils and have really been pleased with how we're coming along. We're seeing more wildlife, our soils are getting healthier, but we've got a long way to go. Transitions in our area, you can expect to take between 5 and 7 years, which is a long time. We are also very fortunate because in 2020, when our daughter saw how we were taking the farm, she decided to come back and farm with us. We will not be farming for very much longer, but we now have someone who we can hand off to and continue our transition and our biological farming systems. One of the things I do want to emphasize is that the farm bills and USDA policies have a profound effect on farmers' agronomic and economic decisions. It drives so much, and it's so important to farmers. Farmers really do participate in the farm programs, and they're very important for many reasons. So it's just important to know how profound they are and how profoundly they affect what we do. We also, what I've also found in our area is while people really feel the need to change and do something different, they don't know what to do or how to do it. In our area, a lot of the farmland is rented. And so there's very little ownership, or the owners are not in the area, and the farmers who rent their land have very little latitude to change or take a lot of risk. And transitions are risky things. Learning is expensive, and it means that you have some failures, and it means you have some successes. Farmers, I really do truly believe, are in a double bind. They know that they can't afford to continue what they're doing ecologically and economically, but they don't know how. They don't know how to do it. And there's also just a fear of trying to transition. We need solid safety nets, and we need ones that will help us get through this technical safety nets and economic safety nets. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Our next speaker is Moses Momani. Moses and his wife, Lona, both grew up in farm communities in Kenya. Today, they own and operate Dawn to Dusk Farm in Cambridge, Minnesota, about 50 miles north of the Twin Cities. In 2020, they also co-founded Kilimo, Minnesota, a nonprofit incubator farm dedicated to training and supporting beginning farmers of African descent. Through his own experiences and those of the farmers that his organization trains, Moses can speak to the challenges in securing farmland, starting a farm business, and accessing federal farm bill programs. Moses, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, everyone. I came to this country in 2004, and in 2006, I started farming. I was at Hopkins in Minneapolis, and I started with 3 plots in that year. I started growing Kenyan greens and selling to the other Kenyans or East Africans that I could reach. The following year, I went to 11 plots, and the third year, I went to 34 plots. And that down to me that I needed a bigger space, or I was just connected to land. So what I did is I started driving around the Twin Cities looking for land that is closer that I can rent. I ended up in an incubator farm called Big River Farms in Stillwater, and I moved over there. I still wanted to grow the traditional crops, but after going through the program, by the end of that year, I changed and I started growing the mainstream vegetables. I learned how to grow organic vegetables. I learned how to keep farming records, all those things. Even though I grew up in a farming place in Kenya, we were not doing. So it was like a new journey for me. Training there for 2 years and learning all this, I also learned that I need to keep these farming records so that I can use them to like my farming history, prepare my financial readiness before I could go to like a commercial lender or even the USDA. In this case, I wanted to go to the USDA and get a financing for a farm that I wanted to buy. So 2 years training. After that, I moved on to rent from other farmers. I rented for another 3 years. And then in 2014, that's when me and my wife, Lorna, we were able to purchase a 20-acre farm in Isanti, which is 1 hour north of the Twin Cities. We continued growing vegetables and selling at the farmers market. We continued building that business. In 2020, after selling for like 6-7 years, we felt like we could now mentor other Kenyans, other East Africans that we knew wanted to farm and wanted to own farms. So we opened up our farm. We had 15 tillable acres and we were only using 5. So we opened up the remaining portion. We gave a 1/4 acre each to the 5 farmers that we wanted, but we ended up with 13 farmers that first year in 2020. We ended up with 19 farmers in 2021, and this year we have 32 farmers. Last year and 2020 we had them on our farm, but this year we moved all of them. Like we rented land closer to the cities, which is about 20-30 minutes. And they're all there. The goal is to mentor them in the next 3 to 5 years. Then the farmer can do what we did and be able to go and get financing for their own land. So because we saw land access being the biggest barrier to immigrants like us getting on land. Right now we have more people than those 32 that are willing to farm, but we are limited by land. We cannot have all of those. So that is kind of what is happening here in Cambridge. Our hope is to mentor the farmers 3 to 5 years, show them how to keep records, as I said, build markets, because that's also what they need before they can get the lending, create networks, create those farm networks before they can buy their land and be part of the farming community. We also hope to connect with land and be like take care of land, live on the land, create co-ops, create farmer leaderships. Like we believe that as a community we will flourish if we like become together as a community, and also bring our own cultural foods into the system, because we eat foods that maybe people don't know about, but if we are not farming, if you're just gardening, people are not going to know more about all these other foods that are out there. So that's what our hopes are. And we also want our children to grow up on land, to grow up on farms, and we'd like to pass that on to, to our children. So we'd like to see the land that we are working on being like protected in some ways, so that we can have this going forward to, for our children. The challenges that we face, however, as we hope for all this, is we come with no savings or very little credit, with us. So even getting land, it took me 7 years to just feel like I was ready to go to a bank or to the USDA for a farm loan. We live in cities. We are all tied to the cities, but we don't have a path that will help us get out of the cities to getting to the farms. So incubators, was one way that I was able to link this back and be able to get to be a farmer. We have land access problems in the cities. Farm land is tied to real estate, and it becomes very expensive. We have zoning laws that say a farm is 10 acres. Why not 2 acres? So all those are the challenges that we feel like protecting land will enable those emerging farmers those interested to farm, be able to, if the land protection is made, land prices become affordable, and then those interested in farming can be able to get into farming. And protecting land means protecting the communities that we all love. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses. And batting cleanup for us today is Doug Wolfgang. Doug has served at the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture for nearly 25 years. Since 2007, he's been the director of the Bureau of Farmland Preservation at the department, where he oversees the state's agricultural conservation easement purchase program. Through that program, Pennsylvania has been a national leader in farmland protection, and we are pleased to welcome Doug's insights on the importance of that work and the opportunities ahead. Doug, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. But as Andrew mentioned, Pennsylvania is a national leader in farmland preservation in that we've protected over 6,000 farms and 600,000 acres through perpetual easement, 2 big milestones that we reached over this past year. So as background, quick background, the department partners with 58 counties that fall under the umbrella of the state program. Farm owners apply at the county level, where applications are ranked by local boards and offers are made to the highest ranking farms. The easement value is determined through an appraisal process, and prime farmland soils under the greatest threat from development pressure are targeted for preservation. Ultimately, those easement recommendations go before a 17-member state board for approval, and purchases use funds which are a combination of state and county funds, or all state funds, and increasingly federal funds, which is why the Farm Bill is so important to us and the work that we do. We also partner with township governments and 23 land trust organizations, nonprofit organizations, but in total, $1.8 billion in funds which have been spent to date. But just touching on what the public benefits of this investment and why it's so important and why these conversations need to occur as we're talking about the Farm Bill. From the economic perspective, farmland preservation is an investment in the future of a thriving agricultural industry here in Pennsylvania. In fact, in Pennsylvania, it's $132.5 billion total economic impact, according to a recent study. Agriculture supports 1 in 10 jobs and is nearly 20% of our state's gross domestic product. Farming here is diverse. We have very many traditional crop and livestock operations. We're first or second, depending on the study, in direct marketing of fresh fruits and vegetables, third in the nation in organic production. We're top 10 in dairy and poultry products, and a leader in mushrooms, hardwoods, apples, and a host of other products. So from an economic perspective, it definitely makes sense to preserve farmland through easement acquisition. This is Pennsylvania I'm speaking to, but this applies to the nation as a whole. From a food security standpoint, we're within a day's drive of a large percentage of the nation's population where I'm sitting here in Harrisburg. If you drive in any direction for 24 hours, you'll reach the majority of the nation's population. Pennsylvania has some of the most fertile non-irrigated soils found anywhere in the nation or the world. The pandemic really brought food security issues to the forefront and exposed some vulnerabilities with the food supply chain. Never has there been a more important time to build a resilient food system than now. And of course, the environmental benefits, the conservation values of preserved farmland cannot be overstated. In Pennsylvania's case, every preserved farm is required to have a conservation plan that addresses all soil, water, and nutrient concerns on the farm. This is critical, here in the Chesapeake Bay watershed where we're located, and so much work is being done here by Pennsylvania farmers to clean up the watershed. But we're increasingly focusing as well on the climate benefits of well-managed farmland and its ability to capture and store carbon compared to more intensive land uses, and soil health. Soil is a vital living ecosystem that sustains us all, and that's really what it's all about. So the public benefits are numerous, and I know we could go on and on, but for participating farm families, this program means a lot more. Farmland is a farmer's legacy, and agriculture here is deep rooted. It's woven into the fabric of our culture. Farmers are some of the best stewards of the land. The program gives farmers peace of mind that the farm will always remain in agriculture forever, and that you can't put a price on that for farm families who have their whole life tied up in that land. So from a business perspective, though, farmers will use these proceeds to expand or diversify into different types of operations. They'll reduce debt and pay off mortgages. They'll engage in value-added production and processing. Agritourism here in Pennsylvania, like across the country, is booming. And also they'll use the funds to transition, in some cases, the farms to the next generation by being able to tap into some of that equity and help in the division of those assets. So these funds are cycled back into the agricultural economy, and investments in rural Pennsylvania stimulate local economies. The funds are well spent. In most cases, farmland preservation, also makes farmland more affordable for the next generation. And we're hearing, increasingly with our other speakers about land access and how critical that is. Quickly highlight our federal participation, since I'm here to talk about, how it's related to the Farm Bill. Two programs that we partner with, and when I say we, the participating counties and the farmers across the state. Ag Conservation Easement Program, otherwise known as ASEP, we've been participating since 1996 with that program and its predecessor, and have leveraged roughly $40 million in reimbursements for purchases that we do at the state level. And then RCPP, which is the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Several projects that we have. One, we wrapped up to install best management practices on preserved farms in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Another one was to enhance farmland preservation and natural resource protection along the Kittatinny Ridge area of Pennsylvania. And then a third pending proposal that we have is to install climate smart practices on our preserved farms and to provide resources for preserved farm owners who are interested in transitioning to organic. So we're optimistic and hopeful for that proposal. But why these federal funds are so critical? American Farmland Trust recent Farms Under Threat 2040 study reinforces this compelling need we have to continue this work. Even after we preserve 6,000 plus farms here in Pennsylvania, there are 1,200 more that remain on the backlog list across the state waiting to be preserved. And we're counting on federal funds over this next decade to help us preserve these farms. Property values aren't getting any cheaper, and it makes sense to ramp up this effort more so in the short term if we can. And Pennsylvania continues to lose farmland to large lot residential subdivisions and commercial development, a trend that I believe is consistent across the nation. AFT's advocacy on behalf of state and local programs has resulted in meaningful reform of ASEP and RCPP during previous farm bills. In some cases, processes were streamlined and leniencies granted in favor of well-established state program guidelines and participating farmers. But we feel there's more that can be done, and we look forward to building on these opportunities in the new Farm Bill and just working with that strong partnership that we have with federal, with USDA, Natural Resources Conservation Service. Quickly, Pennsylvania, like other states, are also trying to figure that out, or trying to find the right balance between utility scale solar development and protection of farmland and natural resources. And recognizing that in some cases it's compatible, but concern for those cases where it would take prime farmland out of production. So working with American Farmland Trust, like other states are, on best practices there. But lastly, real quick, I wanted to touch on the farm transition piece and share Pennsylvania's efforts. Many farms are in transition, either the ownership of that farm or the type of operation business model. In fact, 1/3 of Pennsylvania's 6,000 preserve farms have transferred to new owners, and we're predicting that will be 2/3 by 2030. So even though ag conservation easements make farmland more affordable, land access for new and beginning farmers continues to be a concern. Rising costs of inputs, fertilizers, fuels, feed, the steep cost to start up a farm, unpredictable markets, and erratic weather are all risk factors and barriers for beginning farmers. And these issues, of course, aren't unique to Pennsylvania, but affect farmers across the nation. Here in Pennsylvania, part of Secretary Redding's remarkable legacy is the only state-level farm bill funding package for agriculture, now in its 4th year. Several of these initiatives at the state farm bill level focus on beginning farmers, and I feel could be a model for something at the national level. But one is the Farm Vitality Planning Grant Program, another realty transfer tax exemption for farms that are being transferred to beginning farmers, preserve farms, and then also a beginning farmer tax credit. But we tried really hard to target these resources to preserve farm owners, and many have taken advantage, like the Rhineford family, for example, a 3rd-generation family dairy operation in Juniata County. First, they successfully preserved their farm through conservation easement, and then have transferred that farm since then to 3 sons who will continue to expand the operation and have diversified into other areas. They're innovative young entrepreneurs, the future of agriculture, and we hope to see emphasis for farm transitions in the upcoming farm bill to help families like the Rhinefords transfer farms to the next generation, and also to provide opportunities to new and beginning farmers and historically underserved producers, which is something that we have a big concern over, and also to expand into urban agriculture areas. So thank you to AFT for allowing me to take part in today's talk. And on behalf of Secretary Redding and my counterparts in other states, we appreciate your leadership on a national level to advance policies that will save farmland and invest in the future of agriculture. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Doug. And thanks too to Cheryl and Moses for sharing your important perspectives that have helped to inform AFT's Farm Bill agenda. We're now going to transition to an overview of AFT's Farm Bill's goals and priorities. I'm Chris Coffin, AFT's Senior Policy Advisor. I'm going to kick us off with our goals and recommendations related to farm and ranch land protection, to business technical assistance, and to land access and farm transfer. And where better to start than with acknowledging the essential role of the 2 million farmers, ranchers, and rural landowners who steward our 900 million acres of working land, that precious, finite national asset that John talked about. We count on them to keep their land in agriculture. But for those who are land rich and cash poor, there is often no option but to sell land for development when they want to retire or face family financial needs. One way we can keep land in farming is to ensure that these landowners have other options. So here are Farm Bill priorities around farmland protection. Essentially, we see 3 important roles for the federal government. One is investing in permanent farm and ranch land protection. The second is leading by example in reducing the footprint of federally funded development. And the third is encouraging states and counties to do more to protect their agricultural land base. Doug talked eloquently about the positive impact that Pennsylvania Farmland Protection Program has had on the state's agricultural economy. A recent Montana study quantified the economic benefit from investments made through the Federal Agricultural Conservation Easement Program in Montana. Every ASEP-ALE Farm Bill dollar allocated to farm and ranch conservation yielded $1.89 of economic opportunity. And again, same other numbers as the Pennsylvania program. Given the importance of this program in not just protecting farmland, but facilitating farm transfers and reinvesting in agricultural operations, our top priority is to increase funding for ASEP. As this chart shows, ACEP-AL financial obligations, so that's land going directly to the purchase of easements, money going directly to the purchase of easements, represents less than 25% of total ACEP spending in FY21. That funding level is simply not keeping pace with demand or need. So you see on this next slide some of the other changes we'd like to see to ACEP. Increasing the federal share would help landowners in areas with no state or local public purchase of agricultural conservation easement program or PACE programs, who can't afford to donate a significant portion of the easement value. A more robust certification process for experienced entities like the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture could help to improve and speed up program delivery while recognizing the expertise of these experienced practitioners. And we see enormous potential in buy, protect, sell projects that can facilitate the transfer of a farm or ranch land to a next generation producer if we can make some meaningful tweaks to the program. We'd also like to see the Farmland Protection Policy Act strengthened so that we can track how much productive farmland is actually converted as a result of federally funded projects. Right now, it is only planned projects. We also think that one way to incentivize states and counties to do more to reduce agricultural land conversion is to provide some funding for them to help engage in land use and farmland protection planning. Another Farm Bill priority is around business technical assistance. Moses spoke to the work his organization is doing to mentor and assist other immigrant farmers with things like business planning, financial literacy, and land access. We believe that this exact type of individualized assistance can be powerful in building profitable and sustainable farm businesses. Last year, AFT and 118 other organizations urged USDA to create a dedicated source of funding, enabling service providers to offer customized technical assistance around business plans, financial literacy, land access, and farm transfer and succession. We're grateful to see that USDA has begun to provide some resources for this type of assistance. We would like Congress to consider a dedicated pot of multi-year funding for this purpose and think that its impact would be maximized if that technical assistance was linked to some type of financial support for business planning implementation. As John mentioned, we are in the midst of a huge generational transfer of agricultural land and wealth. Our Farm Bill priorities here are to keep farmland in farming during these transfers and to create wealth-generating land ownership opportunities and more secure land tenure for a more diverse next generation of producers. We also want to better understand how these opportunities are being impacted and potentially limited by trends in land ownership. So these are just a few of our recommendations. We think more can be done to incentivize farm and land transfers. The CRP Transition Incentives Program, or CRP TIP, could be tweaked or even reimagined. And we see value in giving USDA authority to pilot new incentive approaches. We also see the need for new financing mechanisms, perhaps implemented at the state level, to help young and historically marginalized producers afford to purchase farmland. A formal land access coordinator position at USDA could help to leverage opportunities among and between agencies. AFT is also very interested in seeing a formal Office of Small Farms. As the Office of Urban Agriculture is coordinating work across USDA, so could an Office of Small Farms help to identify program needs and specific challenges to small acreage farms and ranches. Last, certainly the most impactful way to incentivize farm and land transfers, as you heard Doug say in what they did through their Pennsylvania Farm Bill, is through the tax code, which is why we would like to see the Commission on Farm Transitions, which was authorized in the 2018 Farm Bill, specifically charged with analyzing ways the tax code could be harnessed to promote land transfer and land access. Lastly, as an organization guided by data and research, AFT wants to see USDA to continue to invest in the tenure, ownership, and transition of land survey, or known as TOTAL, which was last done in 2014. You see here how the TOTAL survey helped to inform current knowledge about generational land transfer. We'd like to see survey findings for all 50 states. And we'd also like to see USDA conduct more analysis of land ownership and land concentration patterns and trends. And with that, I am now going to turn things over to Samantha Levy, who is AFT's Conservation and Climate Policy Manager.
Thanks so much, Chris. So I'm going to begin by going back to something Cheryl said earlier. We are seeing increased extreme weather, and it's becoming the new norm. This is not a theoretical future. Climate change is happening now, and farmers are on the front lines. In fact, Cheryl mentioned they could only harvest 10% of their crops in 2021 due to drought and extreme heat. We heard hundreds of stories like Cheryl's in our workshops leading up to making our recommendations. A New York farmer suffered $70,000 worth of hurricane damage. A Washington farmer losing a quarter of their season's revenue from a heavy snow-induced greenhouse collapse, smoke taint from fires in California, land lost to continuous flooding in the mid-Atlantic and Northeast, and as Cheryl mentioned, we're just coming off of a terrible heat wave that is affecting producers across the country right now. We need to do more to support farmers and ranchers so they are resilient to climate change, because they are losing money and time while we delay. And this farm bill is critical not only to building their resilience, but also to reducing emissions. Climate scientists tell us that we have a brief window of opportunity to act before increased emissions trigger more intense and extreme weather. The good news is we already have a framework to build on to achieve these goals. NRCS conservation programs authorized in the Farm Bill provide financial and technical assistance to help farmers adopt climate-smart practices. Practices like nutrient and feed management, which reduce potent greenhouse gas emissions while also lowering expensive input costs, a win-win. These programs also help producers adopt soil health practices, which have been used by Indigenous and farmers of color for many, many years. Things like planting cover crops in the off-season, reducing tillage and disturbance of the soil, planting perennials, increasing diversity on the farm, many of the things Cheryl mentioned, and grazing livestock. All of these practices build resilience to drought, flooding, heat, and other extreme weather, while also improving water quality, sequestering carbon to fight climate change, and providing a 3-to-1 return on investment for farmers. A win-win-win-win. Now, though some of this is changing, between 2009 and 2018, only 1/4 of NRCS funding from the most popular program, EQIP, went to soil health practices. And even though these practices support farm viability and resilience, adoption is not yet widespread. For example, as of 2017, only 6% of acres were planted with cover crops. Why? Often for many of the reasons Cheryl mentioned. Adopting these practices can be costly. There's a risk of losing money during transition. Transition is expensive. Learning is expensive, is what she said. Farmers may not have the information or support they need to transition to new ways of doing things. Structural barriers, like those Cheryl mentioned with crop insurance, exist. Or farmers rent their land and they can't justify long-term investment, which is why secure land access and our recommendations there are doubly important. In this next Farm Bill, I hope you agree that the time has come to really act to build resilience and reduce emissions. AFT's goal with our Farm Bill recommendations are to support adoption of these climate-smart practices by 20% of farmers and ranchers, the leaders and innovators, and to ensure assistance to do so is equitably available to all. And then to set up systems to enable these leaders to help others in their communities make the same choices, just like Cheryl's doing. Now, Emily and I are going to highlight a few of the recommendations that AFT is making to get there. First, supporting our farmer and rancher leaders. NRCS programs, as Cheryl said, provide critical assistance to address the #1 barrier, cost. But with current funding levels, NRCS is unable to provide financial assistance to all those asking for help. For example, EQIP left 70% of applications unfunded between 2010 and 2020. We must work to increase funding for these programs to meet the demand for help, and especially for climate smart practices. And because transition years can be so difficult, AFT is advocating that we target more funding for climate smart and soil health practices through the new EQIP Conservation Incentive Contracts program, which offers longer term support. We must also continue to center equity in access to these programs. More funding must be coupled with increased set-asides for producers that have been historically excluded. In our workshops, we also heard that small-scale growers need more tailored assistance to participate in these programs, very similar to the things that Moses said. And data tells us that women, BIPOC farmers, veterans, and other historically underserved farmers are more likely to operate small-scale operations. Cheryl pointed out that the application process for CSP was difficult, but their agent really helped them. So AFT is asking for more streamlined applications to help all farmers and ranchers, but especially small-scale and limited resource growers. And we're asking to fund community-based program navigators to help historically marginalized producers apply. AFT is also advocating for other targeted support for small-scale operations, higher conservation payment rates for small farms in EQIP and CSP, and an Office of Small Farms to determine the other support they may need. Now, since the last Farm Bill, we've also seen many states develop and fund innovative soil health programs to complement USDA support. Now, from working as AFT's New York policy manager for the last 5 years or so, I know firsthand how successful state programs can be in helping producers build soil health, and how challenging it can be to grow state funding for these popular programs. And so AFT is encouraging inclusion of a new federal match for innovative state soil health programs to augment their successes and incentivize other states to build programs of their own. Finally, as you heard from Cheryl, regular access to trusted information and support is essential to successful long-term adoption of practices. NRCS provides help, but can't reach everyone, and some farmers even reported waiting for years for their assistance. So AFT is advocating for more funding and staff at NRCS and more supplementary support through cooperative agreements and by fixing the process to become a technical service provider. Most importantly, though, we need to build more ways for farmer innovators like Cheryl to share practical information with their peers about what works. So we're asking Congress to set up a way to pay experienced leaders to mentor others. Now I'll pass the mic to Emily Liss, AFT's Federal Policy Associate, to round out our conservation recommendations. Emily?
Great, thank you, Sam. So now we're going to jump over to our crop insurance recommendations. So in 2019, crop insurance covered 380 million acres, which is over 90% of all corn, soy, and cotton. So saying that the program is popular is a vast understatement. It really truly is an essential part of the farm safety net. So fundamentally, crop insurance is all about managing risk. The thing, though, is that we know a lot more about risk today than we did even 10 or 20 years ago. We know that risk is increasing due to climate change, and we know that on-farm practices have a huge impact on an individual farm's risk and their resilience. So our goal with these recommendations was to improve the program's management of risk by integrating this more up-to-date understanding, but doing it in a way that wouldn't interfere with the program's ability to protect farm viability. So we really have 4 different categories of recommendations that I'm going to overview for you. The first category is to reward farmers for adopting risk-reducing practices. For example, here we're asking to codify the pandemic cover crop program, which gives farmers a small rebate on their insurance premiums for planting cover crops. This program already exists at the state level and in 3 different states, and it's another great example of a win-win-win. Farmers reduce their risk, they save money, all while improving soil health and water quality. The second category is to increase coordination and data sharing between all of the various agencies that play a role in crop insurance. So for example, here we think that additional data sharing would help RMA, the risk management agency, to update their actuarial tables to actually account for conservation within the program. The third category is to make crop insurance more accessible, especially for small and diversified operations. For example, here we're asking to adjust the way that crop insurance premiums are calculated to allow for a wider range of crops to be covered by the program. Our fourth and final category, is to make sure that farmers are never forced to choose between conservation and insurance. We think that these two things should absolutely go hand in hand. So earlier, Cheryl mentioned having this exact challenge of losing her insurance because she was intercropping. And intercropping is an NRCS approved conservation practice, but it's currently not allowed under crop insurance. So we're asking to improve compatibility, such as by creating new endorsement options that would allow farmers to implement certain conservation practices without any penalty of losing their coverage or anything else. So that concludes all of our recommendations. So now I am going to pass the mic back over to Tim to bring us home.
Thank you, Emily. The recommendations we presented today are not an endpoint. They're a starting point for a broad advocacy campaign. If you want to see these types of policies enacted, Congress needs to hear from you. We just added to the chat our 2023 Farm Bill page. There you can learn more about our full list of recommendations, not all of which were highlighted today, but also there's a link there for an action alert that you can use to write your members of Congress. Another step, please subscribe to AFT's email list and follow us on social media. And don't hesitate, if you like a piece of content, don't hesitate to share that with others. And in the months ahead, you'll hear even more from us as we stagger the release of 7 white papers that will provide additional analysis and information on individual policy recommendations. These white papers will be accompanied by blogs, making some of these wonky topics much more accessible to the public. And we also plan to release recommendations on smart solar siting. You can also share your story with us. If you have firsthand experience with some of these challenges or the programs we highlighted, we want to hear from you. There are few things more powerful than putting a human face to these issues. And before we transition to Q&A, I would be remiss if I did not mention another way to participate. You can donate to AFT. Raising money for policy work is incredibly difficult, and our advocacy efforts rely predominantly on general operating funds. It takes funding to support a talented team, to host farm tours, to bring farmers to DC to speak with policymakers. Anything you give is appreciated. With that, I wanted to transition to the Q&A portion of our event. However, I did want to introduce one additional voice. Julia Basinski has been working with us on farmland protection and farmland access issues specifically. She has vast experience in this area, most recently serving as the Deputy Policy Director for the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. I would now ask that all of our panelists turn on their cameras for the Q&A. As a reminder to our audience, you can enter questions into the questions portion of the control panel, which can be accessed by hitting the orange arrow on the upper right. Our first question is to Cheryl. You mentioned the need for additional assistance in transitioning practices. What would this transition assistance ideally look like for you?
Oh, that's a complex question. Ideally, assistance with the transition would include technical information on how to transition with the minimal amount of disruption to your farm. The other piece, though, is it would be nice to have the ability to have a safety net in place that allowed some flexibility and some assistance if your crop isn't doing well, or if you've made a mistake in your transition. You know, if there's some sort of way sure that you have revenues coming in. Because sometimes in a transition, you do make some spectacular mistakes, and it really does compromise your revenue streams. But that is a very complicated question.
Thank you, Cheryl. Our next question is for Doug. How has the pandemic impacted farmland loss in Pennsylvania, if at all? Are you seeing any changes or trends in farmland loss with things like increased remote work, et cetera?
Yeah, so that's a good question. First, regarding how the pandemic has resulted in farmland loss, I don't have any specific data to back that up, but I would say at least initially, then early on in the pandemic, everything came to a grinding halt, including construction projects, but that came back, 2-3-fold since then. But obviously COVID-19 forever changes the way that we do work in an office setting. And more people are working from home than ever before. And I don't know long-term what that means for farmland preservation. We hear about downtown businesses or office spaces that are vacant. And I would just hope that, to your point in your study about build better cities, that we could reinvest in those areas as residential units to help support a growing population rather than have that as a factor that exacerbates sprawl. But it's a good question. I don't have any figures or anything to back it up, but it's for sure has some implications.
Thank you, Doug. Our next question is for Moses. You spoke about mentoring to help other farmers in buying land. I was struck by the comment that immigrant farmers come here and they don't have a credit score. How do you work with farmers to help them get ready to buy land?
I mentor them to begin with. So because I understand their background is, they have the zeal to work the land. I try to advise the farmers that it takes, it takes different parts to get all these together. So there's the skills that you have to develop, but also there's the market that you have to develop. And then there's the, like your financial readiness that you need. And then I always say, if let's say you go to the USDA, they will look at your credit worthiness, but that is not what is given the most weight as when you go to the conventional lender. What will be given more weight is, are you farming, how much effort you're putting in. So I would say, again, across the cultures, even in my community, it's hard to pinpoint where exactly the farmer is with his financial readiness. But overall, if we have that love for farming, we will get there. So we just started this in 2020, and there's a lot of farmers out there coming, and they're saying, I want land. Some come before they have checked in with the bank or with any other financial advisor to see where they are. And then sometimes when that happens, I would say this is the first thing: go back, check with the bank to make sure you know where you are, what your credit will be, so that you can work from there. So yeah, it's I don't have an answer to a straight answer, because that's where we need more technical support. For me, I'm good at saying, let's do farming, this is how you space your vegetables and all that. I'm good with mentoring them out in the field, but we need more of other human capacity to make the whole group work.
Thank you, Moses. Next question is for Chris Coffin from our team. what federal programs do you use to fund agricultural conservation easements? You've mentioned ASAP, but are there others that should be mentioned as well?
ASEP is the primary protection program for working agricultural land. The Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP, does have the option in it to use funding through that program for working lands protection. So both farmland, rangeland, grassland, woodland as well. So, and the flexibility of that RCPP program means that a partner can think about having a project that includes both an easement plus additional conservation cost share going to who is either is the owner or the operator of that land. So that makes it a useful program to be able to do both of those things and combine it and get to that stacked conservation that we like to see. Beyond that, those are the two principal programs. There are a couple of programs through the Department of Defense. There's the Sentinel Landscapes. There's the Army Compatible Use Buffer Program. Those require you to be adjacent essentially to a military facility. If you'd like more information about that, you can find it on our Farmland Information Center website.
Thank you, Chris. Next question is back to Cheryl. How important is word of mouth among farmers when it comes to conservation practice adoption? You kind of mentioned your own experience in trying to forge a network. And how could you see that potentially getting much wider adoption among farmers, these types of peer-to-peer connections?
It's really interesting. We started ours primarily because the conservation districts in our area, they're very strong. And so Spokane Conservation District had a farmer group, a biofarming group, and we decided that we needed one in Whitman County because we're a little bit different than Spokane, which is about 75, 80 miles north of us. The word of mouth is important. It seems that you need at least one or two people to kind of get together and start a group and be plugged in enough with the farming community to say, hey, this is what I'm doing. Are you interested? When we started our group, it was pretty much a text string of, this is what we're doing. This is what we're experiencing. Are you interested? Would you like to meet? And we did meet. And so word of mouth is really important. It's people being interested and active and committed enough to meeting as well. The grassroots by definition are kind of a spontaneous organic thing. But it sure is nice to be able to have someone who knows enough to say, here are the parameters of having a meeting, what you want to set for an agenda, how you want it to look, and how you want it to be driven.
Thanks, Cheryl. For Doug, having protected the most farms in the nation, Pennsylvania has an established nation-leading farmland protection program. What do you look for in the partnership with the federal government when it comes to protecting farmland?
Yeah, really good question. And as I mentioned during my portion of the presentation, we've leveraged over $40 million now in federal reimbursements. And we really see a critical need moving forward in the next decade if we want to meet our goals of preserving those 1,200 farms that remain on county backlog lists with escalating real estate values that we need to, really take advantage of those federal opportunities and access those federal funds. So I think really for us, flexibility is key. We have a great working relationship with our state NRCS office, having availability to staff at the federal level who is there to work with on a daily basis to answer questions and be able to help process these applications in a way that's efficient and effective and gets the funds spent without bureaucracy and red tape, and that we're able to get the funds put onto the land and put to good use that is so widely supported by taxpayers and voters here in Pennsylvania, I think is critical.
Thanks, Doug. Moses, when we think of farmland access, we often think about farmland ownership. However, rental is clearly a critical path for many farmers, as you noted from your own experience. How difficult is it for farmers you serve to find rented land when landowners may be most likely to work with someone that they already know in the community?
Yeah, it's difficult because, and part of it is because of the cultural differences. A farmer might be used to just seeing one person work on their land, and when they give this farmer a tenure year-to-year basis, later in the summer, the farmer is coming with the community to work on the land, and everybody all over, and they say, this is not what we that's not what I expected. But also, as I rent land, there are other things that are needed on the farm. So the regular farmer who is not a vegetable farmer comes with a tractor, tills, plants, lets the rest mostly for rain to work on. But a vegetable farmer wants water. They want a fence. They want somewhere to store the vegetables. So all these things, they make it a little harder to, like, for the landowner to work with the farmer, because the farmer keeps on asking for a little more. Can I use your water? Can I do this? Those are the challenges that we see. Besides, just, straight out exploitation, sometimes where, you're given a small piece because it's close to where your apartment is. Somebody will say, I have an example of a farmer who was paying 500 for less than an eighth of an acre, and that is because they desperately need somewhere to grow and, grow their cultural relevant food and put it in the freezer for their family. So those are the things I see, and as I see them, I just wish we could have more either organized way of finding land or just something. Thank you.
Samantha, a question from the audience. Could the Farm Bill allocate funds to state departments of agriculture for purchase of equipment, seeds input, or for low cost, other things that would encourage the implementation of cover crops?
Well, I guess I'll say that helping farmers purchase equipment, especially for small scale growers, we see this as a big barrier to adopting conservation practices. I will say that there are state departments of agriculture that have passed their own programs to fund equipment. One example would be the New York Climate Resilient Farming Grants program, allows conservation districts to purchase equipment and rent it out to farmers. So it's essential, and another strong reason for the federal matching funds for state soil health programs.
Our next question is for Chris Coffin. The New York State Purchase of Development Rights Program and the federal program have different requirements that make them incompatible. Is there any chance of harmonizing these programs?
Right, that's a very good question, and I think that the answer to it, we hope, is going to lie in the certification process that I talked about. For experienced entities, experienced land trusts, state purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs that have been statutorily created, have the force of the state attorney general behind them. We know that they are very capable and have done this type of work for a long time. With a certification process that is more robust, we hope that there's additional flexibility in the way that they can run the program, including how to harmonize with their own state program, because it's not unique to New York. It is a challenge for a host of different reasons. And I think that the solution, again, is going to be through a more robust certification process. But it is our hope that, yes, it will become easier to be able to harmonize between state and also county and local programs as well.
Thanks, Chris. Cheryl, you referenced some of the challenges that you experienced with crop insurance integrating with the conservation practices. Can you say just a little bit more about what your experience was there?
Well, what happened was we have participated in the crop insurance program up until the fall of 2019. When I went in to certify, I told them that we were raising winter wheat and we were putting an understory of winter lentils in there. And basically the insurance agent just basically said, we cannot insure that. Because you've intercropped, we cannot insure your winter wheat. And so we just didn't get it insured. We do have hail and fire, but those address specific issues and they're not a year-round policy. And so as we've gone along, because we are intercropping, and that is a part of our contract with the Conservation Stewardship Program, that we must intercrop, we really just haven't even been able to have a conversation with our insurance agent to be able to participate. This year, I was hoping we could do it with winter triticale that we're growing. And as I said, because we do not grow winter triticale in this particular region of Whitman County, the agent said I may not be able to even insure that. We also wanted to know if we could get insurance for winter peas, and we were told, well, no, not until we know that they've survived the winter. So we'll insure them in the spring as a spring pea. So there's a real, it's just a really difficult thing because they have to work within the boundaries and their actuarial tables, et cetera. But it really does, and you'll find this among a lot of farmers, it's just that it seems like you're being really, really discouraged and somewhat penalized for trying to be innovative and for trying to, do the right thing as far as conservation goes. And,
Thanks, Cheryl. Doug, one of the things that came up in the chat was the sort of opportunities and challenges related to solar development. Is this something that you're experiencing in Pennsylvania as you're trying to simultaneously protect agricultural land and also engage in conservation practices, as well as trying to address climate change through solar?
Yeah, solar development is definitely a hot issue for us in Pennsylvania, like it is throughout the country. And in particular, in Pennsylvania, if it's land that's cleared and open, chances are it's prime farmland soil that's being farmed. If it's in woods, it's probably lower class soil, but it seems that, for obvious reasons, proximity to infrastructure, the ability to have the panels, put on that land, that farmland is the obvious target there. So we recognize that there's potential. It's not all bad. The agrivoltaics are an opportunity there for farm owners to diversify their portfolio potentially. It'll be interesting over time to see how that evolves. We've seen examples of grazing and pollinators, but what other type of diverse, commodities that we produce in Pennsylvania and the Northeast and across the country can we also do in tandem with, with solar? I don't know, but if land is taken out of production and it's prime farmland soil, there's an obvious concern, not only for the future of agriculture from a state perspective, a regional perspective, and what that means for the supporting ag infrastructure. But we're looking to work on best practices that we can provide to local planning organizations and help with some of the siting and decision making moving forward.
Tim, you're muted.
Thank you, team. You mentioned, Moses, you mentioned that your organization provides business technical assistance. So for those in the audience that may not be familiar with this term, this is helping, it's a whole suite of services, either helping farmers find land, build more successful businesses, strengthen sort of their financing, et cetera. Are there things that the federal government can do which would enable you to do even more of this work?
Yes, as far as farming is concerned, we still find it's hard to navigate some of the USDA programs. One of the things I tell the farmers is to keep as much records as they can. That's all I do is help them just keep records, writing what they do every day and all that. But having a cultural relevant person work with the farmers is very important, because form can be very plain and straightforward to you, but to somebody from another culture or language, they read it, but they understand it differently, or they get something else. So somebody has to translate that. That will be important to me if we had like interpreters, translation at these agencies, that because it sometimes is very difficult for groups of farmers to access those services and even to pay for somebody to help them do it. If they're trying to come up like me, I'm actually not an organization. I'm still fiscally sponsored by another organization, because I still would love to see from the farmers I work with, who among us also wants to take these leadership roles. And then from there, that's how we will end up with, like formally having Kilimo as an organization that is, paying for services. But for now, it's just farmer mentoring another farmer.
Thanks, Moses. Our next question is for John Piotti. In your speech, you mentioned the need to sort of not treat individual issues as silos, how one opportunity reinforces another. There's a question here just about what are the intersections between farmland protection and addressing climate change?
Oh, well, they're huge. On many levels. First off, protected farmland by itself, studies that AFT has conducted with UCal Davis have shown that itself is a climate mitigation strategy, that because farmland that is protected produces very few emissions, whereas the development that would otherwise ensue produces a lot of emissions. So that's one area of connection. Another area of connection is if we don't have enough farmland to grow all of our food. Let me take a step back. One of the wonderful things about farming is it can be used to simultaneously grow food and provide a whole range of really important environmental services, including capturing carbon. But if we lose farmland, we put more pressure on the remaining land to grow our food. And although it's wonderful that we can both grow food and provide these environmental services, if we have less land to grow the same amount of food, there's going to be far more pressure to manage that land intensely for food production, which will likely result in less opportunities for environmental benefit. And then the third reason that I'll mention is if we are serious about storing carbon in the soils, it needs to be done permanently, or it doesn't have the right effect. And so you can follow all the best practices you want, but if that piece of land gets turned into house lots in 20 years, you will lose much, if not all, of the benefit of those practices. So farmland protection and better practices go hand in hand in the future. If we're going to get serious about thinking about carbon markets, we're going to have to think about best practices and land protection as a package.
Thank you, John. And I think looking at the time, we had just one last question for our panel. In just a single sentence, what do you hope to see in the next Farm Bill, or what gives you hope going into the next Farm Bill? Samantha, if you'd like to lead off.
Sure. I often find myself thinking that the next Farm Bill won't be until 2028. And so looking at it that way, you know, we're seeing extreme weather now, and climate change is already happening, and it's expected to get worse if we don't curb emissions. I'm really hoping in this 2023 Farm Bill that we will build resilience and address emissions reduction, because climate scientists are telling us, you know, we've got less than a decade to really turn the tide. And we already have practices that are being funded that can do so. So more attention in this Farm Bill on those practices and supporting farmers like those we have here and building the resilience that they're looking to build.
Thank you, Samantha. Emily, any thoughts on this front?
I feel like there are so many things I could say here. I think just really briefly, what gives me hope about this next Farm Bill, you know, echoing everything that Sam just said about, you know, we have to, like, this is the opportunity. We have to make change now. 2028 is a long ways away. But what gives me hope is that I see so much attention, so much movement towards making this Farm Bill what we really need. It seems like it's just every time it comes up a lot. People are thinking about these issues, especially with the pandemic and all the issues that sort of gave rise to. I just see so much attention, and that makes me hopeful for the next Farm Bill. So thanks, Tim.
Doug, any thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that, you know, just enhanced focus on the conservation title of the Farm Bill and all the momentum that we speak of with the issues that we've talked about today, and just how important these funds are to what we do and the work and our mission. And then also just a renewed focus or increased focus on land access issues and on opportunities that we have to benefit the next generation of producers. I think really I see that there's a lot of momentum in that direction, and I think that's very exciting to see what that will look like. So thank you.
Julie.
Great, thanks, Tim. I think what's giving me hope about the conversation about this Farm Bill, it seems, actually piggybacking on what Doug just said, the focus on land access, and really both land access and also equity, and historically who has had access to land, who hasn't had access to land. My hope is that conversation, that there are more groups that are actually weighing in, making the land access issue a really prominent one, and putting that equity lens really prominent as well. So what I would love to see in the next Farm Bill is, and I know this is a really, really daunting task for Congress, but really to take a significant shift in how we're looking at farm policy across the entire Farm Bill, across every single title, to really understand what impact any policy, even if it's land specific or not, is having on access to affordable land for the next generation of farmers.
Thank you, Cheryl.
What really gives me hope is organizations like AFT actually being out there and really addressing some of the issues that farms have and trying to be more ecologically sound in their practices. I'm really hopeful that people are concerned enough now with how disruptive extreme weather and extreme economic events have been to farmers, that they can take a look and see that there are some really sound recommendations coming in from other organizations. Because again, the Farm Bill has a profound impact on farmers.
Thank you, Cheryl. We did not, by the way, plant that line with Cheryl. Chris.
I guess I'm going back to the conservation title, and my hope, and I am hopeful by a recognition that many of the programs in the conservation title have benefits, financial and economic benefits. And when you think about farmland protection, again, that reinvestment in a farm operation that's possible, the ability to transition land. Same with many of the conservation programs that you are really impacting the economic bottom line of farm operations. And I think that it's still a story that we need to tell, but I'm hopeful that it's being heard, that the conservation title is providing important economic opportunities and benefits to farmers and ranchers.
Thanks, Moses.
Yeah, I'm not very conversant with the Farm Bill, but I would say the more the voices, the chance to give more voices and emerging farmers in the Farm Bill, because that's more of, taking care of the future and the community, because the landscape and, we all want to farm, we all want to be part of the, the food system. So thank you.
Thank you, Moses. And last but not least, John Piotti.
Well, I hope you're going to offer your thoughts too, Tim. Hope I'm not last. But what gives me hope is that I think so many more people care about and feel connected to these issues than they used to. The Farm Bill is no longer just a conversation amongst farmers and political leaders in farm states. People they care about where their foods come from. They've gotten engaged. I've been working in this field for 30 years, and I think that's the most significant difference, which is going to drive the policy agenda in a positive direction. Now, some people have read one book or seen one movie and think they have all the answers, and there can be some danger in that as well. But generally, there is a belief and understanding in agriculture now and its importance for our future, and that gives me great hope and optimism.
And I would personally echo all the sentiments of everyone here today. The pandemic, I think, both revealed a lot of the strengths in our system, but it also revealed a lot of the fragility. And that creates an opportunity. The first step to solving a problem is recognizing you have one. And so this Farm Bill presents that opportunity. I think that's a great note to end on. In closing, I want to again thank our speakers for joining us here today. Thank you to my AFT colleagues, as well as our board of directors, for all of their work in putting together the policy platform and putting together this event today. Finally, I want to thank each of you for joining us here. The first steps in policy engagement is learning about the issues, and you're doing exactly that. The next step is to make your voices heard. Again, check out that webpage. You'll see the action alert to send to your members of Congress. And we look forward to working with you all in the months ahead to ensure that we have a farm bill that really meets the challenges of today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.